Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Love Your Dogs podcast. This podcast is heart led, real life, experience based, and not dry science. My name is Bre Drake. I am a holistic dog health educator and a certified holistic pet health coach. Coming to you from beautiful South Carolina. It is so nice out today. We have been pretty cold for our neck of the woods. So it was so nice to approach 70 degrees today. It feels like spring. So excited. I'm in a good mood and I'm hoping it seems like the time of day where I feel most ready to record a podcast is the time of day where the sun is creeping and about to be in my face. So I'll try to be quick and beat it. But at a minimum, I'm going to make sure I move over a lot sooner than I did in the last episode. So here we are back downstairs, back where I feel most comfortable. I really liked how that worked out last episode. So I'm doing it from downstairs again. Pine is passed out on his bed, and if I didn't have so many things hooked up to my setup, I would pivot around to show you. He's so cute. He's sleeping so peacefully. But anyway, I want to talk about titer testing today because this is something I see titers recommended constantly in the holistic dog world. And if I'm being completely honest, I think that a lot of people are spending too much money and stressing their dogs out unnecessarily by getting something they don't actually need, and that is a titer. So titers can be very helpful in certain situations, but they're also marketed as like this safe, holistic middle ground between vaccinating and not vaccinating. And the science is a lot more nuanced than that. And I know I always promise this is not dry science, so I'm going to try and make it as easy to understand as possible. I really like this topic. And titers, they're just, again, there's something that it's just touted as a safe middle ground. And there are instances where they are beneficial, but not always. I really think for the most part, you're wasting your money, and it is a vet visit at the end of the day. It is stressful for you and your dog. So I don't think they're entirely necessary, but I'm going to get into all those details. So first, I want to zoom out and make sure that we're talking about the same things because there's a lot of confusion around titers and what vaccines we can titer test for. The core vaccines are rabies, parvo, and distemper. Now, I have heard that leptospirosis might have been made a core vaccine in the last year or so. I don't agree with that. To me, core vaccines are still just rabies, parvo, distemper. These are viral diseases. Viral immunity is the immunity that can be long lasting, usually for life. And then there's non-core vaccines, which are bacterial. So those are lepto, Lyme, and Bordetella, or kennel cough, Bordetella, kennel cough. And these behave completely differently than our core vaccines. They don't create strong, lasting immunity, and they're short term at best. So, usually, the fact that they're given just once a year tells you enough that they are kind of bogus. They're kind of bullshit, to not sugarcoat it. To be truly effective and offer protection, they would actually have to be given more than once a year, especially lepto, all of them. All of them would have to be given more than once a year to be truly effective. They're very short lasting, and titers aren't helpful in proving that immunity still exists. So when we talk about titers, we're really only talking about parvo, distemper, and rabies. So now that we got that out of the way, we know that when we do a titer, it's only parvo, distemper, and rabies. What are vaccines actually trying to do? And in a nutshell, to keep this very simple and biological, the goal of a vaccine isn't protection itself, it's to create an immune response. So antibodies, memory. And this is kind of like nosodes that we talked about a few episodes ago. The nosodes offer protection while our dogs are being exposed naturally. The exposure that trains our dogs' immune system. So the vaccines and the nosodes are kind of just hovering over to protect our dogs while they're getting natural exposure. Because although your dog receives a vaccine, for example, for parvo, they're still likely being exposed to parvo in the environment more frequently than you would realize. And that is what's actually training the immune system naturally. So that is why I feel like a lot of the times the vaccines get the credit for the heavy lifting that our dogs' natural immune systems and natural exposure is doing. I really think a lot of that training is coming from natural exposure, where the vaccine just offers this sense of security, although a lot of times there's not really security there. But anyway, so really it's the exposure that trains the immune system, not necessarily the vaccine and not the nosode. There's Pine. So before we even talk about titers, we have to understand what a vaccine is, what it's trying to accomplish in the first place, because the goal isn't protection directly. The goal is education. We are educating and training the immune system. When your dog is exposed to something, whether that's a virus naturally in the environment or through a vaccine, the immune system goes, hey, what is this? And it builds a defense plan. So, antibodies. First, you get antibodies. Hey, buddy. You think of antibodies like little search and destroy tags. They circulate in the blood and they grab onto a virus so that the body can neutralize it. They're kind of like wanted posters or little sticky notes that say, hey, this doesn't belong here. And titers, they measure these antibodies, the ones that are floating around in the bloodstream. But this is the part that most people don't realize. Antibodies are just the surface layer of immunity. They're not the entire story. So there's B cells, which B cells are basically antibody factories. When they recognize something they've seen before, they can pump out new antibodies really fast. So some of those B cells stick around for years, and usually it's for life, just waiting. And then there's T cells. So when you have T cells, these are more like your immune system's special forces. They remember the invader and they coordinate the attack if it ever shows up again. Even if antibodies drop low or disappear from the blood, these memory cells are still there sitting like, don't worry, we've got this. So immunity isn't just about how many antibodies are floating around today at this moment in time when we run the titer test. It's about whether the immune system remembers what to do tomorrow and the next day and a year from now. Vaccines create that first introduction. They teach the immune system what the virus looks like, but it's natural exposure over a lifetime that keeps strengthening that memory. And in many cases, natural exposure is actually building broader, more durable, more robust immunity. So when we talk about titers, we're only measuring one tiny piece of this puzzle, the circulating antibodies, not the memory cells that are actually what matter the most. Good boy. You're so good. So I realize that may have been a little dry sciencey, so I want to give you an analogy that I like to kind of help explain this for those who just want a really simple explanation. The way I like to picture the immune system is like a small town fire department. Antibodies are the firefighters that are actively driving around in the trucks. They're visible, they're out on patrol, you can count them, you can see them, they're driving around everywhere. But the fire department isn't just those trucks that are driving around, it's the training, the station, the crew, it's a muscle memory. So even if you don't see all of these trucks cruising around on the streets every day, it doesn't mean that the town is not protected. It just means the firefighters are at the station. They're still there, they're sleeping, they're training, they're waiting. And the second that there's smoke or a fire, they are out the door really fast. They're there. So titers only measure the trucks that you can see driving around. They don't measure the trained crew sitting at the station ready to respond if there's a fire. So low antibodies doesn't mean that there's no protection. It just means that the immune system isn't actively fighting something right now, which is actually normal and healthy. That's actually a really good sign. So we like it when our dogs haven't been exposed to something. So a dog that's been vaccinated recently or exposed to something like parvo or distemper recently, they're likely going to have a lot of antibodies circulating. They're going to have a lot of fire trucks driving around because there was a fire recently. I hope this makes sense. And so that's one of my other main beeps with titers is that you spend all this money getting a titer, you bring your dog to the vet, you get the blood draw, you wait on the results, you spend all this money, and then your vet says, well, it came back as low level or it was 0, so you should go ahead and vaccinate your dog. And that's why I really like to explain that analogy, because a positive titer is a positive titer. And I hate that this happens, and I hate that the results are so often misinterpreted. And that's why I don't like the idea of relying on titers or doing titers repeatedly throughout a dog's life. So I'll go back to the example of Pine. He's been titered one time. So he was the first dog I went the natural immunity route route with. We did homeopathic no-sows and we did safe natural exposure. And he's the first dog I've done this with, the first puppy I've done this with. So I wanted to get a titer test just to give myself peace of mind and be able to have something tangible to show all of you that that can work. So we did that one titer test, and that will likely be the only titer test I ever do. It requires a vet visit, it requires money out of my pocket, and really it serves me no benefit because they're not legally required in place of a rabies vaccine. They're usually not accepted in place of up-to-date vaccine records for landlords, groomers, boarders, trainers that require up-to-date vaccines. So to me, unless you have an arrangement with those businesses where a positive titer is accepted in place of up-to-date vaccine records, I just don't see the need for spending the money, especially when we understand that science of duration immunity. We understand T and B cells now. So in Pine's case, he tested positive, 5 months old, after safe natural exposure and protection with no-sods. So I know he's protected for life. He had that one positive test. Now, if I were to test him sometime this year, having not been vaccinated and not knowing whether or not he's been exposed naturally or not, titer this year, if I titer tested him, could come back at low by the standards of whatever lab is giving the results and running the test. It could come back as low or as zero. And I wouldn't say, oh, he's not protected, I need to give him a vaccine. I would just say that means that he hasn't been at risk where we've been this past year, past several months. That means he hasn't been exposed to anything. He hasn't been vaccinated and he hasn't been exposed in his environment, which is actually a good thing. So remember, if there was a fire, if they were exposed to parvo, those memory cells, those B cells would create more antibodies when needed and help to fight off and neutralize the virus before there would be an infection. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. I feel like I tried to work really hard to come up with a way to explain that in a non-sciencey way. So again, to sum that up, this is where a lot of people get confused. Antibody levels will naturally go down over time. That's completely normal. And that doesn't mean that immunity disappeared. It's antibodies drop, memory cells remain, and memory cells can't be measured, but memory cells will jump into action if there is a threat. So think of it like chicken pox. We get chicken pox once in our lives and we don't keep checking our antibody levels. We just know that our body remembers it. We're not getting boosted. We're not checking antibody levels. Our body remembers. And that's the same for most of our childhood vaccines. We're not getting repeated childhood vaccines all throughout our lives as humans, and dogs aren't any different. And research has shown, there's lots of great research out there by Dr. Ronald Schultz and Jean Dodds. They're veterinary immunologists, but they've proved in research in perfectly official, acceptable studies that immunity lasts for at least 5 to 7 years, and usually that's for life. So there's study limitations from funding perspectives, ethics perspectives, where they couldn't continue these studies on past 5 to 7 years. So that's not meaning that they weren't able to prove that in a study. They just didn't continue their studies that long. So based on what I told you, just said about chickenpox and our childhood vaccines, we know that dogs have lasting immunity for life. Duration of immunity exists because of that exposure piece, the initial creation of antibodies, and those memory cells that know how to protect us because they remember. So what's really ironic is this, that titers measure actual immune response, but legally they're not accepted. Meanwhile, the receipt of a vaccine is accepted. So proof of a shot counts, but proof that the shot actually worked doesn't. And that doesn't align with current science. And that is literally standardization and paperwork and a bureaucratic circus. If we want proof that our dogs are protected, a titer test shows us that, not a vaccine record. The laws are so outdated and do not take into consideration the health of our dogs. If they did, a positive titer test would be far more superior than a vaccine record and far better for our dog's health than repeating that vaccine just to have that paperwork. I mean, we can have the paperwork from the titer too. So it's baffling to me that rabies is the one vaccine that we can't get around legally. It's really challenging. There's medical exemptions. People get creative, do what you do to protect your dog and advocate for your dog. But it's the law. The other ones we can refuse. We have every right to refuse them. It could make things challenging. It could require some lifestyle shifts, some moving things around, not being able to participate in training and boarding and things of that nature. But rabies is required by law, and it is it's horrible that we have the science to prove that our dogs are protected beyond the first shot or the first 2 shots. We have the science, we have we have the mechanism, we have the testing to prove that our dogs have immunity still, but yet, because this is more convenient and easier to standardize, vaccine records are what's accepted instead. All right, so to bring this all home, once a dog's immune system is mature and it's supported holistically with real food and movement and sunlight and low stress and less toxins, less chemical load, their immune system is training every single day. At this point, additional vaccines and constant testing, titer testing, don't benefit. They just add more intervention. So for me, titers aren't something that you need to keep chasing. They're usually a one-time confirmation and not this lifetime subscription, not this every single year forever. I trust biology. I trust the science. I know that the immune system is capable and smart. And I know that once a positive titer is achieved, that it lasts for life. So that's what I wanted to get across here. I wanted to cover that you don't have to have them. They're not just a replacement for vaccines. They're a tool to show you that your dog achieved immunity. And when you dig into the science more, you understand that that lasts for life, especially when their immune system's mature and it's constantly getting trained and exposed and you're supporting them. You don't need to keep paying for those tests. And I also wanted to let those of you know that get the titer test to know how to read those results, because most of our traditional veterinarians just jump to, they're shifting liability. They don't want liability. What it all comes down to is they're going to tell you the easy guaranteed thing because they don't want to take any liability. You can say, oh, I understand that came back inadequate or came back 0, but because I know the science, I know about memory cells, Bre Drake taught me about T and B cells and the fire trucks, because I know about that. I appreciate your recommendation, but we're not going to proceed with another vaccine at this time because I know that my dog has memory cells, and I know that this result just means that A, they haven't been vaccinated in years, and B, they haven't been exposed, so their body hasn't created antibodies. I know this. I'm comfortable with this. We're going to pass on vaccines today. I wanted you guys to know that because I see so many people clinging to these titer tests and clinging to the results. And it's because they don't understand how this works. So that's why it's really important, all things, to understand. And it doesn't take long. It doesn't take long to research some of these topics, even for 5 to 10 minutes before your vet appointment. Research how this stuff works so that you know, because the vet is just going to be careful. The vet is going to protect themselves at all costs. It's much easier for them to say, nope, you got to give this vaccine. And then if the vaccine doesn't fail, it's on the vaccine. It's not on them. So that's important to understand. And for those who do really want a titer test, you want to go the natural exposure route, the no-sod route, you want a titer test after. You're just someone that wants to slowly get their feet wet or see proof that immunity lasts for a lifetime, and you want to do titers every year, every 3 years, whatever. There are more affordable ways to get titers, and they're expensive. No matter how you slice it, they're expensive. And every time I talk about titers being expensive, there's always people online in the comments saying, oh, but I got mine for $50 or $60. There are some labs, HemaPet and Kansas State University's veterinary diagnostic lab, who do offer cheaper titer tests, and Texas A&M may do the same. They do offer them. So when you look at the list of the tests that they offer, it does say $50, $65. But when you factor in driving to the vet, your exam fee, the cost of the blood draw, shipping, it can add up really quick. It's usually going to be at least $100, $200, if not more, and they can get very expensive. But there are also vets who use these labs, who use HemaPet, who use Kansas State University Veterinary Diagnostics Lab, who use these labs instead in-house, making it so much cheaper for you. They're just kind of few and far between. So you could call around at your vets locally and ask them for their pricing, or you can do what I did. There's a whole story highlight on my Instagram called Natural Immunity, and I walk through the process. So I used HemaPet, and what I did was I went on their website and I went to, hemapet.org, went over to testing, titer testing, and then they have a list of the titers they offer. So I purchased the parvo distemper test, which I don't remember, $60, $75, somewhere along those lines. I purchased that test and printed out the paperwork, the receipt showing that I purchased the test. And then within the listing of the tests offered on hemapet.org, they tell you what kind of sample you need. So for Pines, titer test for parvo and distemper, he needed a 0.5 milliliter serum sample. And I just called my local vet and made sure that was a sample, make sure they had the equipment to provide me that kind of sample, made the appointment. I printed out that receipt, went to the appointment, had the blood draw done, and packaged up that receipt for Hemopet, packaged up the blood sample, and shipped it off. And within a week, I got the results back via email, which was great because I really enjoyed it because the vet that I went to knew that Pine had not previously been vaccinated, and they probably thought I was a little crazy for doing the titer test, but I did it anyway. And I like this method of doing it yourself and mailing it in yourself because you get access to the results directly. So there's no room for tampering with the results. I liked that when the results were emailed to me, that veterinary clinic was copied on the results as well. So it was a way for them to see, oh wow, that crazy lady that came in that said she did no sods and natural exposure and no vaccines, her dog produced a positive titer test and he was a healthy, happy dog. So that was really cool. So that is an option. Mail-in is definitely an option and a way to do it cheaper. I would still say I'd have to find the invoice, but I think I was still at about $200 by the time I factored in the cost of the test itself, the shipping, the exam fee, the blood draw. It was still pretty expensive. So that is why I say, once again, you don't have to do them. They're not something where you say, okay, I'm going to stop vaccines completely because Bre says all these holistic educators and veterinarians say the best thing we can do for our dogs is to stop vaccines now, especially in our adult dogs who we know have protection between vaccines and natural exposure. We know it's not stop everything now and then you have to titer test instead to be sure you don't. You can stop now and trust that science and save your money and save the stress of going to the vet. Or you can test once early in your dog's life and do the same thing. You don't have to. It's up to you. If you need it for peace of mind, absolutely titer test as frequently as you wish. And if you need it to bring your dog to training, to boarding, to grooming, I understand that angle too. And I'm glad that there's businesses out there that are accepting titers instead of requiring those up-to-date vaccine records. But remember, a rabies titer is never going to be accepted in place of up-to-date rabies vaccines records in any US state. It's a shame that in the United States, we don't even acknowledge it as something that could replace repeatedly slamming our dogs with a harsh vaccine. So if this helped to clarify anything for those of you listening, please share this with a friend. Share my Instagram account at Tailswell Health. Be sure to check the show notes. The best place to look for more information on the vaccine topic is on my Instagram at Tailswell Health. I have a lot of posts about vaccines. I have a vaccine info story highlight. I have a natural immunity story highlight with lots of great resources. I've really learned a lot about immunity and vaccines and the dangers of vaccines through vitalanimal.com, the Vital Animal podcast, Dr. William Falconer, homeopathic veterinarian. I've learned a lot from him. So yeah, if this helped to clarify things for you, please share it with someone. And if you want to research, you want the research or resources I mentioned, I will link them below. I hope that you guys have a lovely rest of your day. Thanks for being here again, listening, and love your dogs.